Hello and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast. Today, Kim Adams and I explore the topic of psychedelics. And Kim is an expert in psychedelics within our own experience of working with plant medicines over the last 10 years, both professionally and personally. And we touch on ayahuasca, Iboga, and a few of the other plant medicines, but mostly ayahuasca. I share my experience of working with ayahuasca for the first time recently, and it was one of the most powerful, cathartic, healing things that I've ever done in my entire life. This plant medicine literally cracked me wide open. It opened my heart, and I was able to go into years and years and years of holding on to rage, anger, resentment, and childhood trauma, both in my body and in my mind. I was able to release so much in the 2 days that I did this plant medicine. I was able to release what I think would take years and years and years and years of therapy. And so I share my story in hopes that somebody out there can relate to my story, to the feelings, to the trauma, and find a way to move through these emotions and get them out because they no longer serve you. I would love to hear your stories if you can relate to anything. And I hope that this episode can help somebody out there. It's really personal for me. It was pretty hard for me to share this. And I just appreciate your time and willingness to listen. I hope that you find this episode helpful. Hello, and welcome to the Connected Community Podcast, a place to explore possibility through mindfulness, movement, and self-discovery. Our intention is to deliver insight and inspiration while fostering conversations that are genuine, unfiltered, and deeply human. We hope you will enjoy today's episode. Hi!
Hello! Nice to see you, my dear.
Nice to see you. So I'm talking to Kim Adams. I'm so happy to have you on the Connected Community Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about psychedelics. And so
yes.
I would love for you to just kind of tell me like where you are and what you're doing right now with your life in the psychedelic movement.
Sure, absolutely. I'm in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and I'm originally from California. That's where you and I met many, many years ago. So I've been working personally in psychedelics for about 10 years and professionally for about 5 or 6. It kind of gets a little nebulous, but my work has been, I would say, predominantly across all of my work, it's been about consciousness in general because I have a degree in psychology and really enjoy weird intellectual conversations, as we're going to get into. But also the nature of consciousness and understanding how we're navigating this world. So I started using psychedelics personally when I was 33, and I'm almost 43 now. My work has been supporting people with addiction, which doesn't just look like a substance addiction. It can be, anything from work addiction to behavioral addictions to actual substances, to love. People get very muddled in their way in the world, and sometimes they have tried all kinds of other things. What that branched out to is that people take pharmaceuticals often to try to navigate their world, and I help them get off of them, as well as illicit substances, and break patterns of behavior in order to have psychedelic experience, which psychedelic experience does a lot of that heavy lifting. Mm-hmm. So that's what I do. And then I also have a marketing company, and I market companies that are in the psychedelic space.
So when you started down this journey of psychedelics, were you originally starting it recreationally?
Oh, yes, very much so. I grew up in Los Angeles. And so way back when I was a teenager, I did acid and mushrooms. And, I did a lot of things that are available to someone who lives 20 minutes outside of Hollywood is not the same as those that live in the middle of the country. But none of that was therapeutically. But a lot of MDMA, ketamine, did a lot of substances young, and then diverged from that path and went to the kind of academic path, and then more business oriented. But it was all purely getting out of my mind is what was kind of the goal. And then many years later at 33, I looked at it as not just getting back into my mind, but getting back into my body, getting back into my soul, my spirit. And I think that's one of the gifts that these medicines can offer.
Mm-hmm. I think that's where the muddy water is for psychedelics, is that there is this connotation that the hippies are using it and they're just running around in the woods using acid and mushrooms and getting high. And then there's also this therapeutic balance of it. And now you see people like Dr. Andrew Huberman and Sam Harris and these neuroscientists who are advocating for psychedelics. And there is a difference between doing a psychedelic journey with a bunch of friends to get messed up and doing a psychedelic journey as a healing. And so I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that a little bit more. Well, let's go back a little bit to like your personal journey of addiction and psychedelics. Sure.
So it started really, my mother passed away in 2011. And it was fairly sudden. And you were with me at that time in my life. Thank you. And I, unbeknownst to you, I started drinking very heavily and secretly, and kept that going for, I would say it was solidly uninterrupted for about 3 years after that. And where I didn't question it, I just let myself just go real into the grief, and it wasn't even going into the grief, it was avoiding the grief, truly. And then a friend of mine said, I had heard about ayahuasca, and I knew that I didn't want this for myself. That was something my mother always said was, don't drink, Kimberly. We've got so much alcoholism in our family on both sides. Don't drink. Don't ever drink. Of course, I heard that as a teenager. I was like, so drugs are good, right? But it was an attempt, alcohol was an attempt to avoid. And someone had told me about ayahuasca, and this was 2013. And I told a friend, and she said, I just went to a sweat lodge this weekend and she serves ayahuasca. I was like, give me your number. And it took a little bit of time before that actually transpired. But what
was your intention though, when you wanted to do it? Was it to get messed up, or was it to heal?
I wanted to know where my mom went, because someone told me it was the vine of death. Ayahuasca was the vine of death. And I thought, well, shoot, she's there. I want to know where she went. And I don't even think I understood that I was there to heal. I just was like, can you give me more information? Because my world was very, very limited. When you have a substance that you're depending on every day, to manage your universe, your internal reality becomes very small. And it just seems like you have this drive suddenly to do, or not suddenly, over time, to do this particular thing that takes you out of this world. And I had no idea that ayahuasca was going to do what it did. The first time I experienced it, I had forgotten what beauty was. And that was the biggest lesson from my first journey, was that alcohol not only made it so that I didn't even notice beauty, but that like I didn't even recognize it in my world. And then suddenly everything lit up, and I was sober for 4 months without even trying. I didn't want to screw it up. I didn't want to mess up that state. The problem with many addicts and people who have addictions, whether it be to work, to everything, all of the different kinds of addictions, you may get separation from it, but then you go back into your patterns. And so the thing about these substances is they are so disorienting that they can break your patterns, and you have this space to say, maybe there's something different. You've got this window, and some substances stay with you longer. Ayahuasca tends to stay with you about a month. In terms of the experience, I was just meaning that your body, like a lot of these substances, as many people discover, are very cleansing, to say the least. There's a lot of vomiting sometimes that can happen. There's the body just purges substances like Iboga. Your liver produces neuroibogaine, which is an aspect of Iboga, which is another psychedelic substance, and it supercharges in a way and kind of creates a store of that in your liver, and your liver is your detoxing organ, or one of them. Mm-hmm. So it stays with you for 4 to 6 months. So if you are a person that has really extreme addiction, and I'm not recommending Iboga to anybody, by the way, it is a very, very big undertaking. I'm not even recommending ayahuasca to anybody. This was my path.
And when you're talking about ayahuasca, you have to be clean going into an ayahuasca ceremony. So I know to go into that ceremony, you can't have alcohol in your system. I think you have to purge weed out of your system for 3 months, and you can't be on a lot of pharmaceuticals. And so can you talk about that experience? Because you had to get clean to go in. And I actually love that piece, because my understanding, I guess before, was that a bunch of people would just go and they'd get messed up, but it's actually a bunch of people getting clean and going in really squeaky clean into these ceremonies. So can you share about that?
So ayahuasca itself is at least 2 plants mixed together into a tea. And so one is very high in DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is something our body produces. And then there's an MAOI, and that's another substance. There's several different plants that have high levels of DMT in them, and that gets concentrated in the tea. And then the MEOI makes it so that when you intake the DMT, your digestive system doesn't immediately kill it, because there's so much acid in your stomach that otherwise it would just destroy it. And it also just the chemical nature of the inside of you. You can't just go eat some of these plants and have these experiences. So the ayahuasca vine is the MAOI. And so it activates. And for those that, if you want to go down a rabbit hole, go look and see how many plants in nature just simply have DMT present. But we eat them and they don't do anything. And that's because we don't have an MAOI present. And that's what the ayahuasca vine brings. So when you mix those together, you have the opportunity to have this incredible experience. But if you have a pharmaceutical that will interact with that chemical nature, you not only can it just nullify it, but it can also actually do some damage. So if you have an SSRI in your system, for instance, so that's the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, you're going to basically, you're blocking the body's ability to reuptake serotonin, and these substances flood you with serotonin, so you have the possibility of having a serotonin syndrome, which there's a lot of bad things that happen. Bad things. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional, but I've worked with a lot of them because of the nature of my work. Is I do understand the contraindications because I need to know. And I lean very heavily on psychiatrists and PharmDs and people who understand these things far more than me. I'm not that person. But you do need to be careful. Also, additionally, when you look at it from the traditional standpoint, they believe that the spirits of those medicines, cannabis, alcohol, they all have things that are dampening your experience in this world. And ayahuasca is trying to bring you into it and deepen it more. So it's like they're counteracting each other. Aside from that, the reason cannabis and specifically cannabis and alcohol, they're both fat soluble, so they stay with you a long period of time. So if you get off heroin, you've got like a 3 to 7 day window that you have to get off that because it is water soluble. Suboxone, on the other hand, which is what people will take instead of heroin, is intentionally long acting. That's the nature of it, so that you don't go through withdrawal. But it means you got to be off of it for 3 months at least to be safe. And alcohol, same thing. It depending upon how much you drink, you have to purge your system as much as possible. I think I was clean 2 weeks before I went in, and I still purged. Oh, I purged
Mm-hmm.
my first time. I don't anymore. I mean, I haven't done ayahuasca in well over a year, but I don't purge anymore because, and it's not like I'm super clean or anything. It's just there's different purges. I think people need to understand that, like, you might vomit because your body is just trying to get rid of things. You might go the other direction and have
Mm-hmm.
diarrhea, but you also might cry. You might laugh. You might sweat.
Scream. Mm-hmm.
Scream. Oh, scream. Yes. Oh, that's a good one. You might shake. You know, your body might just shake, and it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's a release of energy. So yeah, there's a lot in that. I have a video that I shared a link with you that is contraindications for specifically ayahuasca and Iboga, because those are the ones that have the most contraindications.
I mean, that's why it's important to find the right person, to find the right community, find the right
Yes.
support, make sure
Yes.
they ask the right questions, make sure
Yes.
that you know where they source the medicine from. It's not something you just go and pick up and do on your own.
No.
Actually, I'm not even sure if that's possible. But I would love for you to share about how it's happening, yet it's illegal. And what's like the workaround for that? And how do people find, if they want to do ayahuasca, for example, or if they want to do other forms of psychedelics, how do they find the right support?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll back up and share that I was part of the community that decriminalized psychedelics in Oakland, California. And that was the first step in, it was truly its first step in drug reform, but it's also a first step in giving access and giving us what I believe to be our right to change our state. We did decriminalize nature was the name of the legislation, and that got picked up and put into several different cities, lots of cities around the United States. And they used the same legislation we created, which was basically, so the pathway is deprioritization for police. They overlook the fact that you're possessing some kind of illegal substance because it's just a personal use. When you get to decriminalization, it actually says you are allowed to have personal use, but you can't exchange money for it. And you can't have more than a certain amount based on the substance.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that people are working around it and how it's coming into availability is in the cities that they are decriminalized. People will charge for their service to sit with people, and you have to be gifted the medicine, or you have to come to the sit with your own medicine in hand. For people who think, oh, well, I can just do it myself. Okay, go ahead. I triple dog dare you. If you've never navigated, if you don't have a significant meditation practice and you're not used to sitting alone with yourself, I would not recommend doing psychedelics. Start there. Start with self-reflection. Start with being able to be silent with yourself. That's step one. But there's also the church model. And this was made possible by the Native American church, fought in the Supreme Court for access to the medicines they already had in their culture. And so it made it so that peyote and ayahuasca could be used as a sacrament. And it gives access with the ceremonial context, because the only way you can get access, I'm a member of the Sacred Garden community in Oakland, California. You must participate in the church sermons, which in this case is education on these substances, in a weekly satsang is what they call it, and you learn about them, and then after that you can apply to be a member, and then you can apply to sit with the medicines. But you can't just come off the street and say, here's my donation and give me medicine, and they won't give it to you either. They will sit with you. So these are different access points. There's always going to be a black market. The black market is always going to exist. You can go buy ayahuasca, Iboga, all of these things on the internet, specifically Instagram, which, by the way, just please don't support those people, because one, you don't know what's in it. Two, you also have no idea if you're having an adverse reaction because you don't know what the contraindications are. You don't, and you personally, as a human being, some people can come into it, particularly the biggest challenge is bipolar, because there seems to be what they believe a chemical imbalance there. It might make you a lot worse.
And even schizophrenia, I think, like bipolar and schizophrenia are the ones that if you're predisposed to those, that it can kind of kick in a psychosis, is from my understanding. Yeah.
Right. The serotonergic, which are ayahuasca, they produce serotonin. When you boost serotonin to that level and you already have the predisposed nature to mania, or you have potentially schizophrenia where you have psychotic breaks, it seems like when you flood yourself with these substances, it kicks you into another space. So not safe. And that it's not to say that people who are bipolar can't have these experiences, but again, can you sit with yourself without a substance?
So for you, what was that life-altering experience? Like, was there a moment where you got cracked wide open?
I would say, my first ayahuasca experience, I was in Santa Cruz, California, with an underground guide, and she lived a block from the beach. And I had gone through, there's waves of experience because there's, it just depends on how you're metabolizing the substance. And so you kind of go through these like ups and downs, really intense experiences, then it kind of lets off. And then there's another one that comes in. I was kind of towards the tail end of the experience, but I was still very much hallucinating. And we walked to the beach. And I sat by the water's edge, and with my eyes open, I saw sacred geometry in the sky above the ocean. And it was just complete awe. It was so beautiful. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I think I've ever experienced. That being said, I was also a dancer, and I was a professional dancer for many years. And I, when I was training, I remember one day in the studio that I did it's called an outside turn, and you lead with your arm, and my heart opened. In that moment, my body released and I opened something. And that was equivalent to that psychedelic experience, that moment. And I still can palpably remember that. So it's, again, you don't need these substances. You can experience this just with this meat suit we've got. There's an opportunity. The difference is, are you willing? Are you willing to go into those really deep places? I mean, I was just dancing. I wasn't even trying in that moment to have some incredible life-changing experience. But there is something to be said about sitting down, making the commitment to yourself to say, yes, I will receive this medicine. I will lay down and I will experience what it has to offer, because you're actually taking something in from the outside. And
I mean, I was a little unsure if I was going to share this today. But I did my first ayahuasca experience this past weekend, as you know. Yeah. And the experience was so different than I expected. I went in with expectations. I went in thinking it would be this beautiful psychedelic experience. I went in thinking that I was a little concerned to be a bunch of hippies, like sitting around wanting to do a bunch of drugs, and that I wouldn't be able to relate to anybody. My experience was that the people there were incredible. Like, I just want to cry thinking about the beauty and the open hearts of the people that were there, and the incredible amount of courage that took for all of us to go to that ceremony. Because I do think that for a lot of us there, we did get dragged through the depths of hell to get to the other side. And the purging was so intense. And when I talk about purging, vomiting is one thing, and some people vomit quietly and some people purge so loud. But the purging for me was tears and anger and rage and frustration and dealing with trauma that happened when I was 9 years old, and that I had forgotten about or packed away in a suitcase in a little shelf. And it resurfaced. It resurfaced when I made the intention to do the ayahuasca, and the purging happened before the ceremony. And then in the ceremony, there was massive amounts of pain and grief and that just came out at levels that I would have never been able to access in any other way. And then there was the support that landed at all the right spots. Every time I was going through the first day, I did a 2-day ceremony, which is crazy. And the first day, I just kept getting in my own way, and I was in my head, and I wanted it to be different, and I wanted to change the experience, and I wanted to figure out why I was so stuck. And I was just stuck the whole time. And they kept telling me that my throat was stuck. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, if anybody's throat is open, it's me. I share like thoughts, feelings, right? And then the second day, they pushed me a little bit to go into that pain, and it was so intense and so overwhelming and such purging and such rage. And I finally allowed myself to go into that space. And again, I was so touched by the support. Whenever I needed the support was there, not only from the assistants and the leaders, but the community. The arms were wrapped around me, and people lay on the ground next to me, and people held my hand, and they gave me space when I needed it. And at one point I had such rage, and I felt like I wasn't able to get it out in that room because I just felt like I didn't want to put it out on other people. And the assistant said, let's go outside and scream in a pillow. And I'm thinking, that's a great idea, but like, really? And I couldn't, and I had to fake it. I had to fake the screaming until those screams came out, and they were from the depths of my soul. And I released so much trauma, and I haven't been able to sleep since I was 11 years old. I haven't been able to sleep through the night. And probably 10 years ago, I went on trazodone to help me sleep because I just couldn't sleep and my mind was getting in the way. And 3 years ago, I went on Lexapro for anxiety because I had this feeling in my stomach that had been there my whole life. And I just accepted it, and it just got to be too much. And I was on ADD meds, and I had to come off of all those medications in order to do this ceremony. And that was hell in itself. And it was raw, and that ripped me right open. And I can say now, like, I'm not on those meds, and I won't go back to those meds. And I slept last night. I slept through the whole night. And all of that was seated in this trauma that happened when I was 9 years old. And I was sexually assaulted by a babysitter. And so sleeping wasn't safe, and that anxiety was there. And I was on like fight or flight my whole life. And and I was able to let that go, and like, let it go out of my body, let it go. And I feel so free and so open and so grateful. And it was hard. It was horrendous. It was painful. It was absolutely the most intense thing I've ever gone on. I couldn't imagine people just doing that to get high, because it was so intense. And I remember you saying, like, you know, Grandma, ayahuasca will give you what you need and not necessarily what you want. And I was wanting this like beautiful psychedelic experience that would heal me, that didn't have any of that pain. And it was just, for me, it was just pain and suffering. And I never understood why I walked around so angry when I was a kid. And I never understood why I had this like edge to me. And that whole experience softened me and brought life back to me. And like, I don't want to go on those meds again. I won't go on those meds again. I don't need them. I don't need them. And I'm like, wow, like 2 days of my life, I went through this experience, and we're talking about a lifetime of healing, like a lifetime of healing. And I got cracked wide open. And yeah, I mean, it's not what people think. It's not about going and getting messed up. It's not about these psychedelics. Like it's and here's the thing is that me and everyone in that room was going through that. And I felt like that. And now I understand, like we all walk around with this pain and we all walk around with this hurt and this suffering. And like, we got to get it out and release it. And I don't think this is going to be my last ayahuasca experience. And,
No,
and I
probably
think,
not.
I feel like, even as a maintenance thing, right? I'm off these meds. I'll never go back to these meds, but just to maintain that openness and that open heart and because life gets hard and things kind of pile up slowly and we don't even recognize how they kind of slowly pile on year after year and month after month. And it's about shedding all that bullshit out and like being who we are so that we can be better humans. And so, yeah, it was crazy.
Thank you for sharing that. I know you weren't planning on it, but it's such a beautiful experience to receive something that is that deeply healing. You know, and to witness it, you know, like to hear like that you didn't get what you wanted, the beautiful experience. You know, my first ayahuasca experience, the first like, I don't know, 45 minutes or so was a cartoon of like these bizarre hallucinations, and they were of devils. Actually, I remember I was laying on a massage table face down on the little cradles, and I was looking at the carpet, and there was these devils moving around, and I was like, what is this? And there was a voice that said, are you entertained? Are you entertained now? Like, are we going to get to work, please? God, I'm exhausted. You know, like that's what it felt like, was like this experience of, did you get what you wanted? Okay, well now we're going to get to work. And that was when I went really into hell. That's when I died. And it's not for people like I've known you for a long time. We know each other fairly well. And for people who do have the rough exterior, like I think both of us do, it's sometimes you do need like a real hard knock in the head to be able to feel, to be able to look at the things that are really hard. You know, like the thing that I've heard described. There's a woman who described her ayahuasca experience, and she said, I came in because I was raped, and I never wanted to deal with that, and I never wanted to experience it again. And what ayahuasca made me do was go into it and have it happen over and over and over and over. The whole trip was just being raped over again. And that's why you need a sitter, you know, because otherwise you're going to lose 100%. Your damn mind. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's some substances like mushrooms can be fun and silly and recreational and cute, but ayahuasca is not recreational. Iboga is not recreational. People have started to microdose psilocybin, which I'm not discouraging, but understand what you're doing. And people are microdosing other substances as well, and not understanding what's happening here. They come in like something that is they're very big books, but Alexander Shulgin came out with two huge books. They're life works, really. They're P-Cal and T-Cal, which are like this thick each, and they are about the different experiences. And like he's a scientist, and so he studied the point at which, when you take a certain amount of a substance, that it is the peak experience, and then what too much looks like, you know. And he like talks about all of them. It's amazing. He was quite the psychonaut, that one. But if you just take a little bit, you might sort of tweak a little bit, you know, your experience. But in your case, you got a chance to break wide open in a safe container and got exactly what you needed. And and that's you know, that might happen in a therapeutic setting, Usually it doesn't.
It wouldn't have. You know, because I was there too. I was there like, oh my God, we're in ceremony from 6 p.m. to 10 a.m. the next morning. And like, I needed 2 days to be able to do that with the support. And also somebody like kind of encouraging me to like telling me my throat's stuck. And I'm like, it's not stuck. What are they talking about? And then I was like, yeah, I'm screaming and nobody's listening. I'm screaming, or I want to scream and I can't get it out. And like being able to just scream and get out rage and like have the space and the container to do that with the support where somebody's not going to think I'm lost my mind.
That's a very good point. I mean, I think we are attempting to put it into the medical model. The first psychedelic or sort of pseudo psychedelic experience is ketamine, that is legal in most places now in the United States. It was originally placed in the I mean, you had access to it in pain clinics first before they started having more therapeutic spaces. But regardless, and not dissing anybody who's in the medical professions, but those that tend to gravitate in that direction are not as attuned to their emotional space. You can't be. You're witnessing death all the time. You know, you have to have a bit of a rough exterior to be able to deal with what you have to deal with in our medical system, the way that it exists today. So we're trying to put these highly emotional experiences into the context of a medical model. Most of those people do not even have experience with someone screaming at them just sober, let alone someone who is at the depths of their soul screaming rage, because that is what is necessary to move that energy. That screaming, crying, like uncontrolling vomiting. I sat with someone at one point that she passed out on me. I've actually had a few people pass out on me, which is scary. I'm not a medical professional, so I was like, uh-oh. Which says a lot to, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been personally navigating this experience. Doesn't mean that you are ready to sit. I'm not a sitter. I have sat for people. What I do is I help people get prepared, and not in the integration sense, but in the emotional sense of letting go of their best friend, of their psychotropic drug, their drug of choice, their emotions that are surrounding a behavior that keep them stuck, so that they can then move past that and get into a place where you can get cracked open. You've personally done a lot of individual work. You've meditated for many years. And when you said you were afraid they're going to be all hippies, I was like, come on, Miss Yoga teacher.
I'm a little hippie.
You know, you're a little hippie, but you know, but that's why I love you, you know, like that's you're open. So I think, you know, if you feel like you can allow yourself to be open, and you understand that discomfort is part of growth, and you practice that, you build that muscle, then I think, you know, you can try some of these substances, but definitely do it with people who have navigated the territory. Because imagine if you were by yourself. I mean, you probably wouldn't have done it, but like if you were by yourself and no one said, hey, let's go outside and scream. Like you're still lucid. Like you did it for 2 days, right? You still could sit up and be like, I have to go to the bathroom right now.
Yeah.
You know, like that's you're able to do that. You're still functioning. The interesting part about ayahuasca specifically is it is a community experience. Like you probably noticed when one person purged, a bunch of other people purged, because it's sort of like you create this sort of container for a little while together. And when you're really skilled, which I'm not, but I've had the experience with sitters, when you're very skilled, you can see what's happening with the other person. And so
I felt so seen by so many people. Yeah.
And to recognize they saw something, whether it be energetic in your throat or just simply by knowing you beforehand, like that they were like, this young lady could really use some support to release. You
Yeah.
know, they may have already known that before and came into it. They may have seen something. I had an experience in an ayahuasca ceremony. I was sitting with a friend. This was many, 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 many times in. I don't recommend just sitting with a friend, but she'd navigated the territory for a very long time. She made the medicine herself. But she said, "Hey, Kim, go outside." And I was like, "Why?" And because I was breathing really heavily, I was really, really contracted. And she said, "Did you see that worm?" And I was like, "You saw the worm too?" And like, she could see it because she'd navigated it enough times.
Mm-hmm.
And she saw that I was not only reacting to something, but she was able to see in her visions what I was seeing. And that's a different level of human being. But like, that's like, if you say to somebody, "Oh, it's fine if my doctor gives me ketamine." All right, that might be true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You might be safe. Your physical body might be safe. They might be able to check your vitals. But can they really help you navigate the territory of bodilessness, which can happen in this? The disembodied experience, the ego death?
Mm-hmm.
No, not usually.
And that was the thing, is that every single person in that room went through this massive transformation. It wasn't just me. And yet every single one of us had just the right amount of support. I mean, it was incredible. The exact support that we needed. And, yeah. And then there were also, you know, there was also laughter. There was also joy. There was all of that as well. And then I had this experience where the girl next to me, and she's my sister now. She is, but we just purged at the exact same moment. I was okay. And it happens like that. Like, you don't know you need to. And then all of a sudden you're like, "Oh my God." And we both like lunged forward at the exact same second. And, you know, we looked over and I'm like, "Why do people do this? 'Cause it's total hell." Right. And, and we were able to laugh in that moment. And then I realized that I said to her, "I'm purging the poison out of my body," not meaning the medicine poison. Like, I'm just purging poison, like stuff that doesn't belong to me. And also things that have been said to me in my childhood from family about how I'm supposed to be or who I am. And it's like, that doesn't belong to me. That's not mine. That's yours. That was placed on me. That doesn't belong to me anymore. I'm just purging out things that didn't fit, things that didn't belong, things that weren't mine, things that I no longer needed. I think we think of purging as just throwing up the medicine, and it's not that at all. And then, some people don't purge at all, but they've definitely purged in different ways.
Yes. Yeah. And that actually, I think that, I think a lot of people who may be, you know, interested in the topic of psychedelics, they hear about neuroplasticity. They hear about, this experience of this, this is the great benefit. Well, what I like to decode neuroplasticity, it's a reorganization. This is mine. This is my experience. And this is the stuff that has been placed on me. You know, it is the things, and being able to go, sort that over there. I don't need that. Oh, I would like that. More of that, please. It is an organizational process. That's what is so beautiful about that. And I would say not all psychedelic experiences are that way, because there's some people who come out of different substances with more confused than they came in. You know, it's not to say that always happens, but many times, and this is why set and setting, that was a big topic of conversation in the 60s, is like, set and setting is so important. There's an energetic experience that happens that only you understand when you actually experience it. And when you open yourself up even a little bit energetically, and something changes. If you're moving through the world, like, I can say that I have been accused of resting bitch face many times in my world. And that is because it is the protection mechanism. And so if I crack that protection open a little bit, but I'm not really good at understanding how to receive things, and this has happened to me before. I go out and into the world, I'm microdosing, or I've just had a really big opening the previous day with a private substance experience, and I'm suddenly moving through the world differently. Well, you're open to new experiences, but you're open to new experiences. You need to know, you need to understand where your boundaries are, where you are, somebody else stops and starts. That actually is something that's learned knowledge. It's a practice of learning. And if you crack yourself wide open and then walk into, a normal environment, you do need some help to reintegrate yourself into this life. Because if you walked around protected and suddenly you're wide open, you're actually quite vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So you need to make sure that you have an environment that you can come home to that feels safe. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's true of any kind of what we would deem a therapeutic experience. If you are in a negative environment, you leave and you get help, and then you come back to the negative environment. Mm-hmm. What good is that? Now it's really bad. Mm-hmm. And I would, you said you did a 2-day ceremony, which, again, not advocating, but if you're going to do it, you might as well do a couple days, because the first day sort of gets the body cleared. And it also gives you like a point of reference, like, okay, well, I did this yesterday. Mm-hmm. I think I have an understanding of it, so maybe I can relax a little bit further into it. But also, you're like, the medicine is doing work. It's clearing the system. It is clearing poison out in literal words. Like in my case, I vomited my face off the first day. But you get into a space where your body is cleaner. It's even cleaner, and the medicine can go to work even deeper. Mm-hmm. If you do it a couple days in a row.
And then I think the support afterwards is key as well. I think there was definitely 3 women in that group that felt like sisters to me. And this group has 3 support groups for women and 2 for men that meet every 3 weeks. And people that I'm like, oh my God, how many people do I have in my life that I know this well? After 2 days, I feel like I've known them like a lifetime, because we went through this intense experience together. And now I get to be a part of this sisterhood chapter where I know that all those women have that in them, that they can be real and they can go deep and they're willing to explore. And I think that's one thing that you didn't have, but that safety net of security and support afterwards is key. Because not only is my husband incredibly supportive, but then now I have this community that understands the experience I went through, because they have done it. And I think that's when you talk about integration, that integration is key. Where would you send people for support, for resources, for information that's valid and good?
Yeah. Oh, you're right. Very, very good point. So first off, I would say the psychedelic societies, there are chapters all over the world. But every place I go, I do look to see if there's a society, just so that I have kindred spirits. But also, that's one resource, and that's free. They're always make things very, very cheap or free. So they have integration. They usually host integration circles, or they just have meetups where people get to meet each other. You had asked how to know whether or not the person you're sitting with is a good sitter. One thing is, do they give you preparation? Do they have option for integration afterward? Now we're in a place where things are decriminalized, where people are a little bit more open to sharing that, because sometimes people just give you the experience and they're like, okay, we're done now. Because things, like I said, when things are illegal, you kind of have to disconnect from it a little bit more. But we have the option now to, maybe your sitter is also somebody who can help you before or after, or they can recommend someone. Even just letting your loved ones know. Some people are deeply conservative, and I'm not talking politically. They're very, they want to have this experience, but they might be in a very religious environment. They might be in a very conservative environment where they don't have anybody to talk to. Seek those other people out. Weirdly, Reddit is not a terrible place to go. Can you get some bad advice? Oh, yes, you can. But there's communities of people. MAPS is also a wonderful organization. You can go to the back end of MAPS. There's an area where you can find integration coaches there. But those MAPS does do some vetting. MAPS is a multidisciplinary association of psychedelic sciences out of Santa Cruz, California. Now there's one in Canada as well. Some people who are very traditional, like if you went to Peru and had a traditional sit with a shaman, they don't necessarily always ask those questions, but they ask other very bizarre questions that to a Westerner would be like, why are you asking me that? But they're actually trying to check in with your mental state. They check in with, and they might do so by asking about the spirit world or something of that might not be familiar to you, but they're asking because they're trying to see where you are mentally. I mean, that's what a Westerner would say. They're trying to see where your soul is. They're trying to see whether or not it's even able to get into this experience, much like, my recommendation of making sure you can meditate beforehand. It's kind of in that, like, how self-aware are you? In the case of Iboga, which is really, truly the only psychedelic that can actually kill you by its very nature, because it's cardiotactic. It won't kill you, but it'll make your heart stop. It can make your heart stop because of the nature of it. But people who serve that, you do need a medical professional there. You need somebody to do an EKG before you go in. And if you go into that situation where they're not taking your vitals and doing an EKG, don't do it. Iboga or Ibogaine, it's kind of, they're just different versions. Iboga is the pure plant. In ayahuasca, you don't necessarily have to have a medical checkup, but you need somebody to ask the questions of what your mental state is like, what substances you're taking, what supplements you're taking. All of these things matter. And if they're not asking those questions,
And a week before we had to cleanse our systems, not only of all of those things, or like months before, but also the week before it was, no alcohol, like 1 cup of caffeine, no red meat, no dairy, not sugar and salt and refined foods. Like, we really had to go in with a clean diet. Now, if you couldn't do that, I think it would have still worked. It's just not as effective. But there is something about setting that intention and going through, like, letting go of all of your crutches, because we all have something.
Yeah. I mean, there is something to be said about having a clean diet, so it's kind of, the medicine doesn't work as hard, but there's also contraindication of tyrosine. Things that contain tyrosine will inhibit, it messes with the MAOI. So it may, like, so having red meat, pork, cured
Soy.
meats,
cured
soy.
meat.
Having hard cheeses, they all contain higher levels of tyrosine. So you may not die, but you're going to have a splitting headache. Oh God. Kombucha, it's also fermented. Fermented products in general. Alcohol is it goes through a fermentation process. So that's part of it, but it's also that it dampens your senses. But that's an actual contraindicated substance. Whereas, salt and processed foods, things of that nature, it's not necessarily going to kill you, but it's going to make you really uncomfortable. So what you're focused on is the splitting headache. What you're focused on is the fact that you're vomiting the entire time because your body's trying to get rid of it. And so if you come in cleaner, you're going to be a lot easier. It's going to be a lot easier on you, and it just gets stuff out of your way. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kim, for your time and for your friendship and for your expertise on your own personal journey with these. It's been fun talking.
Absolutely. And you're welcome to reach out to me. Let's see, I'll send you links for my email and things like that. And I'll send some also organizations people can look up. The Global Psychedelic Society has a list and map of everything, of all the societies that have registered, at least with them. There's a lot of different resources online. I look forward to talking to you more, and I can't wait to see more of your podcasts. And congratulations on this adventure. And congrats on getting through 2 days of ayahuasca.
That was quite the experience.
Yes.
All right,
yes.
sister. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for listening to the Connected Community Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. I can be found at www.nikkiyoga.com, NICKYYYOGA.com. Until I see you again next week, I hope you have a beautiful day.